Wow. This stuff you sent me this time is pretty wild, I gotta say. It's all very like hush-hush, shadowy figures and um yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we're going deep on Men in Black for this one. The MIBs,
Right.
those mysterious guys in the dark suits. They show up and make sure nobody talks about the UFOs they saw, or so the stories say.
Well, it is a very intriguing subject. The material you sent me is a good overview, I'd say. Really hits on some of the big things like, how the whole MIB idea got started and
Yeah.
where it fits in with the UFO thing and even how it pops up in like movies and stuff.
Yeah, for sure. And that's kind of what we're aiming for with this deep dive today. We're going to break down the whole Men in Black thing for everyone listening. Like, where did this idea even come from? What are the different ways people have explained these supposed MIB encounters? And how is it that these mysterious guys in black suits became so popular in movies, music, even video games? We're going to cover all of that, but keep it nice and focused. So, got to start at the beginning, right? Like when we say Men in Black, like what are we even talking about? What comes to mind?
Okay, so the most basic way to think about it is, well, you've got these individuals. Usually they're wearing these dark suits, and they're kind of acting like some sort of agents.
Okay.
And while sometimes people say they're, like official government guys, a lot of the time the stories make them out to be working for these super secret, like shadowy organizations.
But even more secret than the government.
Maybe even secret branches of the government that nobody knows about, that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
It gets pretty murky.
Right. And their whole deal is to, like, make sure nobody spills the beans about anything weird they saw up in the sky.
Yeah, exactly. The stories about what they actually do are all over the place, Sometimes it's just like asking questions, trying to get the person to second guess themselves that they didn't really see what they thought they saw. But then other times it gets a lot more intense, right? Like harassing people, making threats. Some people even claim these MIBs messed with their memories.
Whoa.
Yeah. And then you've got the really out there stories that say they'll even like get rid of people.
Seriously?
Yeah, it's all part of the supposed cover-up to keep the public in the dark about UFOs, you see.
It's pretty wild how that definition is all over the place. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like your notes mentioned that anyone who acts a little strange or creepy after a UFO sighting could get slapped with the MIB label. It's almost like we have this built-in explanation for all the weird stuff that seems to go hand in hand with these UFO sightings.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I'd say that kind of vagueness about what MIB even means is a big reason why the idea has stuck around for so long.
Yeah.
Any weird or scary encounter after someone sees a UFO can just be chalked up to, oh, it was the Men in Black. And that's regardless of who those people actually were or what they were really up to. I think that open-endedness, it lets the legend adapt and keep going,
It definitely adds to the mystery. So when did these stories about spooky dudes in dark suits first become part of all the UFO stuff?
Okay, so according to the research, the whole Men in Black thing really started picking up steam in like the 50s and 60s, right in the middle of all those UFO conspiracy theories. It was a time when people were really into UFOs. And your material, it points out how a lot of the folk studying UFOs, they started to think there was some kind of organized effort to hide the truth,
Right.
So the idea that people who saw UFOs were being intimidated on purpose, that fit right into this idea that there was a big cover-up happening.
And there were some specific early cases that really made people start believing this stuff, right? Like, what about that Harold Dahl story?
Yeah, Harold Dahl's story from back in 47, that's one of the first ones we know about where someone actually said they were approached by a man in a dark suit,
Right.
And this guy, he supposedly warned Dahl not to talk about the UFO he saw over Maury Island. It's tough to say for sure if these early stories are true or not, but they were important because they put that seed of the MIB in people's minds, They made it seem like there was a pattern of people being silenced.
Right.
And then you've got Albert K. Bender. His story is even crazier.
Oh, yeah. Albert K. Bender. What was his story again? It was pretty wild.
Oh, yeah. It's a doozy. So Bender, this was in the mid-50s, claimed that he straight up met these men in black suits. And they didn't just threaten him. They told him to stop investigating UFOs completely.
Whoa.
He was absolutely convinced that these guys were part of this super secret government thing, like they were dedicated to hiding all the evidence about aliens. His story was all over the news, and it really solidified that image of the MIBs as these like scary, powerful figures who were part of this massive cover-up. I think what's really interesting about these early stories, it's not necessarily whether they actually happened or not, but the kind of character they created. This powerful, unseen force that's actively trying to keep people in the dark. It plays on this really basic human fear of the unknown and of being manipulated by, like, people in charge.
Oh, for sure. That's a really good point. It makes total sense. And then there's John Keel.
Hmm.
He's pretty well known in the UFO world, and he had some pretty out there ideas about these MIBs, didn't he?
Oh, yeah, John Keel. He definitely went in a different direction. He also claimed he'd met these MIB guys. But his take was a lot more unusual. He described them as, like, demonic supernaturals.
Demonic supernaturals.
Yeah. He even said they had, like, dark skin and exotic facial features and stuff. And he went so far as to say that they weren't even part of what he called consensus reality. That's basically, like, the normal, everyday world we all agree on. So when Keel was calling them demonic supernaturals, do you think he was moving away from that idea of real-life government agents? Like maybe he was thinking more metaphorically or about psychology, maybe? It's definitely not the usual image of government agents in suits. It's more like something supernatural or otherworldly, even.
So as people tried to figure out all these unexplained things in the sky, the MIB became this kind of convenient but scary explanation for why the truth about UFOs was being hidden. It even says here in the stuff you gave me that some UFO researchers started working the MIBs into their own theories, which were getting, how do I put this, pretty complex and, well, paranoid. So the whole MIB thing, it wasn't just about potentially normal interactions or misunderstandings anymore. It was becoming like a key part of this huge, complicated conspiracy. But we also have to remember that these stories came about in a specific time and place, with all its own cultural stuff going on. And some researchers, they've started looking at the MIB phenomenon not as a literal conspiracy, but more like a modern-day folktale.
That's a good point, yeah. There's this folklorist, James R. Lewis, and he made a really interesting comparison. He said that these stories of running into men in black are kind of like the old folk tales about meeting the devil. His idea is that these encounters could be how psychological trauma shows up, but through this specific cultural lens. So maybe what makes the MIB so interesting isn't so much about actually believing in these literal dudes in black suits, but more about what they symbolize, like this unsettling feeling that there are things out there that we're just not supposed to know about.
That's a really different way of looking at it. Instead of focusing on some outside force, it's about how our minds react to things.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, instead of focusing on some outside force, it's about how our minds react to things. And I read that even John Keel, he kind of changed his mind about MIBs later on.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, he did. Later in his career, Keel started saying that maybe some of these MIB encounters were just, normal everyday things that got twisted because of all the stories and myths that were already out there. He even talked about a time in his book, The Mothman Prophecies, where he himself was mistaken for an MIB back in '67. He was just trying to find a phone to call a tow truck.
Oh, wow.
It just goes to show you that how we see things and what we already believe can really affect how we understand what's happening around us.
So it's like a case of mistaken identity because of that whole MIB legend that was spreading.
Right.
It's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. It makes you think. And then you've got that whole controversy with Gray Barker and John C. Sherwood.
Oh, right. John C. Sherwood, he claimed that back in the late 60s, he and Gray Barker actually made up a story about these mysterious UFO beings they called black men, and they did it on purpose.
They made it up?
Yeah, like a total hoax. And then Barker supposedly went and published it as if it was true.
Oh, come on. Seriously.
Yeah. If it's true, it really makes you wonder. It means that people were just making stuff up and adding to the whole MIB myth.
Yeah.
It's like trying to figure out what's real and what's fake, what's just people misinterpreting things and what's completely made up. It's all tangled up together. But whether they're real or not, the Men in Black have definitely left their mark on like all kinds of pop culture stuff.
Oh, yeah, for sure. You see them everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, real or not, those Men in Black have gotten into our heads.
Yeah.
Like, they're in our movies, our music, our books. I mean, think about it.
Absolutely.
Speaking of books, Gray Barker, the guy we were just talking about, wrote a book called They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers.
Yeah.
And your notes mentioned how the cover of the book had these silhouettes of MIBs on it.
Mm-hmm.
That had to be a powerful image for people back then.
Oh, totally. Putting that image right there on the cover of a popular book, it probably really helped to cement that idea of these creepy guys lurking in the shadows in people's minds. It directly linked them to the whole idea that information about UFOs was being suppressed. And then, the idea really blew up in the music world, too.
Yeah, like the Stranglers, they had that song Men in Black back in '79, and then that whole concept album in '81, The Gospel According to the Men in Black.
Yeah.
And that whole album was all about aliens visiting Earth and stuff. It's Pretty amazing when you think about it that a band would go that deep on the whole MIB thing.
Yeah, it shows that the idea wasn't just appealing to like the hardcore UFO folks. It became the symbol of hidden forces and like maybe some scary conspiracies going on behind the scenes in our society. Blue Oyster Cult even mentioned the MIBs in a couple other songs.
Oh, yeah. They had that line, three men in black said, don't report this,
Mhm.
in their song ETI, Extraterrestrial Intelligence. And then that other line, the men in black, their lips are sealed, in their song Take Me Away. It's like they were totally referencing those classic MIB stories.
Yeah.
And even that heavy metal band, Running Wild, they had a song called Men in Black back in '95. And it's about this UFO sighting and how everyone tries to cover it up afterwards. I mean, that's pretty heavy stuff.
Yeah.
It's really wild how this idea, it started in this really niche, almost fringe part of culture, but then it popped up in all these different music scenes. It shows that people are really drawn to this idea of secrets and hidden truths, no matter what kind of music they're into. And of course, we can't forget about the movies.
Oh, yeah, for sure. That's probably how most people these days know about the Men in Black, thanks to those blockbuster movies with Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones. But your notes pointed out that there were movies about MIBs even before those came out, right?
You're right. There was James T. Flocker's film, The Alien Encounters, from '79. That one showed these MIBs messing with a UFO investigator. So people were already putting them on the big screen before those big budget comedies came along.
Yeah.
And then there's The Brother from Another Planet from '84. That one has two men in black trying to catch an alien. Those older films, even though maybe not as many people saw them, they really helped to lay the groundwork for what the MIBs would look and feel like in movies.
And then bam, you've got the Men in Black movie from '97. Talk about a cultural phenomenon. It was huge. Even though it was a comedy, it was still based on that same core idea.
Oh.
And your material even mentioned that the movie was loosely based on a comic book. And get this, the guy who created the comic got the idea from a friend who joked about a black van driving around with government men in black inside. It's a great example of how this kind of weird idea from the fringes of culture can be turned into mainstream entertainment, you know? Turning the MIBs into comedic characters probably made them even more popular, and they really got embedded in our culture. What is it about that core idea, I wonder, that makes it so easy to adapt to all these different forms of media? Maybe it's that idea of a secret world operating right under our noses, you know?
Makes you think, right? And it wasn't just movies and music. Even video games got in on the action. Think about the Half-Life games. They've got that character called the G-Man. A lot of people think he was inspired by the Men in Black.
Oh, for sure.
He's always wearing a suit, and he's like pulling strings behind the scenes, but no one knows what his real deal is.
Oh, the G-Man's whole vibe, you know, that mysterious way about him, the way he's always watching and how you can never quite figure out what he's up to. It's all very MIB, isn't it?
Yeah, totally.
The same themes keep popping up. Hidden power, someone controlling things that we can't see. It just shows you how powerful that MIB archetype is.
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And the stuff you sent me even mentions other ideas that are kind of connected to the Men in Black, like G-Men. That's the classic image of an FBI agent, right?
Yeah.
And then there's the whole thing about black helicopters, and even the idea that some of these MIB encounters could just be elaborate confidence tricks. It's all part of this web of beliefs about government secrecy and weird, unexplained stuff. These other ideas, I think they point to those underlying anxieties we have about authority and not knowing what's really going on.
Exactly. Whether it's that classic FBI agent or the more modern fear of unmarked black helicopters, there's that same thread running through it. It's that idea of hidden power, that someone's manipulating things. And that really taps into our natural human curiosity about what's out there beyond what we understand. And, you know, maybe a little bit of skepticism about those big institutions that are supposed to be in charge.
So after talking about all of this, what would you say are the most important things to remember about the Men in Black phenomena?
Okay, well, I think it's clear that the whole idea of the MIBs has changed a lot since it first popped up in those UFO conspiracy theories in the mid-20th century. They've gone from being like these alleged government agents trying to keep people quiet to almost like mythical figures in UFO lore. You know, we've seen how those early stories, even if they were hard to prove, really helped to make people believe that there was this big coordinated effort to hide information.
Yeah, and we've looked at the different ways to think about the MIBs too, haven't we?
Right.
Like, are they a real, actual threat? Or are they more like a psychological thing, like something our minds create? Or maybe even just normal stuff that gets twisted because of all the folk tales and stories that are already out there?
Exactly. You know, your material, it lays out all these different ways of looking at the MIB phenomenon. It shows how these experiences are subjective and how much our beliefs and the stories we tell ourselves can influence how we see things. And of course, we can't forget how much the MIBs have impacted pop culture. They've inspired so many stories, movies, books, all sorts of creative stuff.
For sure. They've gone from books and music to huge blockbuster movies and video games. The Men in Black have become this like iconic part of our culture. And I think that's a really good example of how a belief that starts out on the fringes can take on a life of its own and inspire all kinds of creative expression.
Yeah, it really highlights how fascinated we are as humans by the unknown and the stories we make up to try to make sense of it, you
Yeah.
know?
Even when those stories involve like shadowy figures in dark suits. It's just so intriguing.
To wait.
So here's something I want you to think about after this deep dive today. How much do these stories about shadowy figures, whether they're specifically called Men in Black or not, reflect this basic human need to deal with things we don't understand, and maybe even a deep-seated distrust of authority? Is the reason we're so drawn to the MIBs not so much about believing in actual guys in suits, but more about our anxieties about secrets and the possibility that someone's keeping important knowledge from us? I think it's worth thinking about how powerful these stories are and how they shape the way we see things that are just beyond our grasp. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. It's been, well, it's been pretty enlightening.
My pleasure.
I'm glad we could unravel some of these mysteries together today.